because I mean, there's just that hull separating you from life and death. Plus, when
Oh
you
yeah.
get into nuclear equipped in terms of ballistic missile submarines, I mean, they could potentially start World War III. So, I mean, the stakes are so high. One of the greatest compliments we got in the history of the podcast, and this is many years ago, when people used to still have to hook iPods to computers and use cables and everything. I had a U.S. Navy submariner say, before I go off on one of my multi-month deployments, I would load up my iPod with your podcasts and listen to them. There might have
Nice.
even been a couple of Richard Dolan interviews in there too that we did a long time ago. So that was
Very cool.
kind of cool. Uh,
I'll mention, let me
Go
just
ahead.
say,
Go ahead.
along with the Soviets, they did report a number of very strange encounters with their submarines. They had a Russian name for this, which I am sure I'm mispronouncing, called Kvarkeri, which actually means croakers, because they would detect these things making a kind of croaking sound, like frogs, I suppose. And all through the 1970s, this was definitely something that got the attention of the Soviet Navy. So the submarines would be down there, they would hear this strange croaking sound. They would attach it to these objects that they were detecting, and these objects could circle around them, could move very, very fast, could approach them, move away, play these types of cat and mouse games with them. The Soviets initially wondered, is this American technology? And they quickly decided, there's no way this is American. This isn't anyone's technology. This is way too advanced. And I don't know what happened to that. The study definitely seems to have occurred during the 1970s and into the early 80s. And it might have been disbanded. And then shortly after that, the Soviet Union ceased to exist by the early 90s. I imagine they may still be studying it, but we don't know about it.
The Chinese. Now, obviously, I think it's going to be pretty hard to get any stories out of the Chinese military or so forth. But do we have reason to believe, especially as they're becoming more and more active, their Navy is growing and growing?
Oh, yeah.
Do we have reason to believe that they're having their own set of encounters?
It's funny you ask. I just, about a month ago, I did my own independent study of the history of Chinese ufology, which was a presentation, a private one I gave from my website. But so it's really quite a fascinating story. There's no question the Chinese military has had many UFO encounters or UAP encounters. And that since the late 1970s, when China really began opening up after the death of Mao, they, especially right through the late 90s, they were actively reporting and recording many, many large numbers of UFO sightings, about as many as you get in the United States. I think they are every bit as active over there. USO sightings or encounters, no, those are rare. USO sightings are very rare compared to aerial sightings. They're very important, but they're quite rare compared to the aerial ones. So what I could say is that the Chinese military has a very sophisticated methodology by which they collect reports from a wide range of sources in their country that would presumably include water-based accounts, but I don't know that they separate that out. But China's military does collect reports. They have a three-tier system by which they will collect, analyze, and then do deeper analyses of their UFO or UAP sightings. So I imagine they encounter these at sea. You know, the South China Sea is a very active shipping area. Of course, the Strait of Malacca, very active choke point for shipping. China's shipping to the world is extremely important to that country. So there's no question they're going to monitor those waterways.
Now, the USOs themselves, I mean, I love the fact that, you just didn't start this study circa 1980 or something. You're going back as far as possible and bringing it to 1969, a year very near and dear to me because that's when I was born. But anyway, the point being, have the reports been very consistent, or have the USOs evolved over time? Have their I almost said flight characteristics, but that does come in with Transmedium, and I'd like to talk to you about Transmedium. But but is it very consistent, or is it all over the map, or has it had a certain evolution? How do these differ, or how are they similar over the course of history?
That's a great question, Jim. I would say overall it's marked by consistency with variations. So we want to keep that in mind. I'll give you one example of consistency. One particular subset of these objects, if we can call them that, are glowing orange balls. I don't know if
Hmm.
they're plasma balls, or I don't know if they are spherical metallic type objects that have a plasma glow around them. It could be both, because there are cases of these spheres being seen without illumination, and they look like gunmetal gray balls, frankly, coming out of the ocean. But I have a case from 1825. To me, it's the first great USO report. It was way south of Hawaii in the Pacific by a British vessel, part of the Royal Navy. At 3:30 in the morning, the crew witnessed a glowing orange orb come out of the ocean, rise up to a level of about 30 degrees, descend back into the ocean, and then rise up a second time. This was recorded by the ship's physician, a man named Andrew Bloxham. We have his diary. It's can be searched. You can read it. PDF's available on the web. And he describes this from August 12, 1825. At 3:30 in the morning, he said you could pick a pin off the deck with the light. Now, that is almost identical to an account from 1971, 150 years later, involving the USS John F. Kennedy aircraft carrier. We're talking about how these communication systems and weapon systems get shut down. That happened to the JFK on July 2nd, 1971, in the context of an orange glowing sphere that appeared somehow just above the ship, caused the ship to go to battle stations, and communications were down for the next 20, 25 minutes. That object could have been identical to the one seen 150 years earlier in the Pacific. So there is definitely consistency there. There's a bit of, I don't know if there's an evolution. One thing that appeared that was new when it happened were triangles. So you start getting a number of triangular USOs starting in the late 1970s. And there's one potential USO case of a triangle from 1959. It's hard to know how accurate that one is. With that exception, they're all from the late 70s onward. So that seems to be a new development. There's an aerial case. It's not a technical USO, but I include it because it was from 1870, and it was from the dead center of the Atlantic Ocean, where you have a steam vessel almost midway between Brazil and North Africa. So you've got basically 1,000 miles of ocean, no matter what direction you look, where these guys were. It was getting towards sunset, and the captain and his crew tracked this object just flying over them under the clouds. Now, it's 1870, so nothing
Right.
that looks mechanical is supposed to be flying over the center of the Atlantic Ocean. So I include that story in this. And that object was described as kind of like a flying saucer. It was roundish. There was a bit of an appendage coming from the rear of this that had almost like a hook. Very strange, but it was described as a very mechanical, artificial type of object, and it just moved off ahead of them into the sky and eventually was lost to sight. So there are definitely there's a lot of consistencies in some of the older accounts with what we might describe today.
Now,
I don't think it's a radical difference.
when it comes to transmedium, the idea that you have something that goes from being a USO to being a UFO in a one fell swoop, what percentage of USO accounts fall into that transmedium category? I've got to think it's probably a minority, but I don't know.
No,
Where does that fall?
it's a majority.
Really interesting.
Of the ones that I've collected. Yeah. Now I can't say that my data is comprehensive. I collected, I put together a spreadsheet that includes 672 of these cases. So it's a lot, but it's not comprehensive. And the cases that are in there, I personally selected for one and only one reason, is because I thought these were good cases. They seemed good enough for me to think I want to describe this. So of all of those, yeah, more than half are transmedium. So that means either emerging from a body of water or entering a body of water. 20% only were solely under the water, or maybe a little bit more than 20%. I included a certain number of objects that were very low over the water, not absolutely in contact with the water, but there's a good guess that they probably were, and that's about 10% of the cases.
Now, of course, if something's underwater and you're above water, it's difficult to tell. But as best you can tell, have most of these objects maintained their shape and size, or do they tend to mutate in any way when they go from one medium to the other?
No, the cases where I'm seeing this, they seem very, as far as I can tell, they're quite consistent. So they are, now it's also true that a lot of the witnesses can't get a good look at the object if it's below the water.